Hi everybody, it's Sarah Cray with Let's Make Art, and today I'm going to show you how to create your very own outlines.
Ah.
I actually have two different processes for how I create outlines depending on what it's for. I'm going to walk you through both of them. This is not the only way, this is just the way that I do it. Okay?
All right.
All right, so the very first thing that I'm going to do is this is the outline process that I use when I am painting a project for the first time or doing something in my own personal work. So this is not teacher Sarah, this is artist Sarah, okay? So I actually create outlines based off of reference photographs or drawings that I do on my own, okay? So if I'm going off of a photo reference, I print that photo reference out, okay? So this is a photo that I got on Unsplash from Natalie Kinnear, which Unsplash is a great resource where you can get like copyright free photographs. Like those photographers put those images up there for artists or anyone to use, which is really kind of them. So thank you so much, Natalie. So this is a gorgeous lily. And so how I create an outline if I wanted to paint this with an outline is I print it in the size that I want, which you can just do in your printer settings, right? You can just like print it. So there's that. I'm going to put it over my watercolor paper. And I'm going to just draw directly on the outline to create the outline on my paper.
Hmm.
That's how I like to do it. So I'm going to tape it in place so it stays like so. So now I can lift this up and it's not going to move around on here, right? So then when I draw, it stays the same. I'm going to take some carbon paper and do shiny dark side down. Now, just so you guys know, carbon paper and graphite paper are two different things. Graphite paper is made with graphite, which means it's erasable, which is really great to use. Carbon paper is the same idea, except it's not erasable,
Hmm.
pretty much. This is carbon paper. I don't know why.
It's what we have.
It's truly like what I have around me, so that's just what I use. But if you were to choose one, I would say that graphite is a little bit easier simply because it is erasable. Okay.
All right.
Now, when I go to do the outline, I'm going to be basically looking at the overall shape. What is it that I want transferred onto my paper? And this is true if I'm doing a landscape, if I'm doing an animal, any kind of thing. I'm just going to like look at the reference itself and think about what elements I want to keep and what elements I want to edit out. For me, I definitely want the flower. So I'm just going to start drawing the flower itself. Now, how carbon or graphite paper works, any mark that you make on here will transfer to your watercolor paper.
Nice.
You can adjust how dark this line is depending on how hard or light you're pressing. So that was me doing a medium press, and this is also a very sharp pen. A ballpoint pen is going to act differently than a pencil, which is going to act differently than various writing tools. So find one that you like. I usually just use a pen and then adjust my pressure. So this is me now doing it with light pressure.
Have you ever
And you can
used? Oh, sorry.
and you can see how much lighter that graphite or that carbon line is just because I did light pressure on this and this was regular pressure.
Have you ever used something like a Sharpie? Would that push hard enough to make a mark?
Markers I very rarely use. One, because the tip of it is so thick.
Mm.
However thick your line is of your marker, that's how thick it's going to transfer onto the paper. So I'm not going for really thick elements because I don't want a super thick outline. I'm going for things that are like narrow and can stay kind of thin. Okay.
Gotcha.
So then usually what I like to do is I'll do like a test where it's just like, okay, that first line was really dark. I don't want it to be that dark because watercolor is transparent. And so I do a test line and then I see if I need to adjust my paper from there or my pressure from there. For the sake of this lesson, I'm going to outline hard pressure so you guys can very clearly see my outline. Okay. But if I'm painting by myself, I usually try and go as light as possible so then I don't have a dark outline on my watercolor painting. Although if you see an outline a little bit, that doesn't bother me. I'm not opposed to like pencil marks on my watercolor painting. Okay. So now I lift up. Beautiful. So there's the overall shape. And then there are these little stamen, which is the whole element, the little, all the parts,
The whole male reproductive organ of the
all
flower.
of the organs. And then you can even go as far as doing detail lines. So on these lilies, you can kind of see how we have some line work here. You can put those in. All right. So then when I lift up, there we go. And then I'm going to decide what other elements I want to include in this painting that I'm going to do. I definitely want the stem, and I like this leaf, but I'm going to adjust it. And the reason why I'm adjusting it is I really don't like that the very tip of this leaf is touching this leaf. That makes it difficult to understand their planes when you put two different subjects that end and start on the same line. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
So I'm just going to slightly adjust it. But I do really like the overall shape of this leaf, so I want to keep that. I like this leaf. I don't like what's happening here. This would take a lot of work for me to be able to visually tell the viewer what's going on, because of all of the different directions and overlapping these leaves are creating. So to keep it simple, I'm just going to say, no thanks. You can include it if you want on your own painting, but I'm just showing you kind of like my process of why I decide to include or leave out some elements. This one down here, I like. This guy, I like. And we can do a little check where you can see how this is feeling. Looks good. I like this, that it's kind of coming up behind here and creating this pretty little thing. And let's see how that looks. Okay, so that's looking really good. So basically, whenever I am creating an outline for my own work or for a painting that I'm about to do, I basically am just tracing the shapes. What is like to make sure that my ratios are correct. I don't have to worry about drawing. If I sat here and drew this lily, could I? Yes, because I took the time to figure out how to draw. That is a skill that I've learned over time. However, something like this takes an hour process to literally 5 minutes. So it's just like for me, I really don't mind doing this. If you're someone who really wants to develop drawing and being able to draw whatever you want, then you probably need to stop doing this and practice actually sketching and drawing so you can get the understanding down of how to recreate things, or render things accurately. Okay.
All right.
The only other thing that I really pay attention to when I'm trying to transfer an outline from a photograph is I look at the values as well. So number one is the overall shape. What elements do I want included here? Is it a building? Is it people? Is it an animal? All of that kind of stuff. And that's where I outline all of the shapes. And then I start to look at the values within there. So then I can make it easier to figure out where highlights are or shadows are, that type of thing. So looking at this, if I were to try and do hints to myself of where I would see some shadows or highlights, I first am going to want to identify those. So there are some highlights within the very center of this lily. You see how that's a lighter value in there?
Hmm.
I would just very lightly kind of trace where I see the light areas on this flower. So then when I go to paint and I'm doing the pink area, I know that about right here is where it's going to transition to a barely there color. Okay. Now, whenever you're doing the outline of something, you have the flexibility to be a little bit darker within those marks. Whenever you're trying to mark a shadow or a highlight, you don't have as much flexibility because this should be a transition area. It shouldn't be a blocky area. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
So then I usually try and make sure that whenever I'm kind of outlining where a highlight or a shadow is, I do it lighter so to make it very easy for me to hide those pencil marks once I paint over them. Okay.
All right.
So that's where you can do it. If you wanted to do the shadows instead of the highlights or both, you would just kind of like, here's a shadow area. You can even go into detail of the dark values that you might see. You can do line work details, whatever you want to include, essentially. There. I like these detail lines. I'm going to put those in. Okay. I'm not going to put these in. I don't think they're necessary. I like just this one right here. So I'm going to leave that out. So now I'm getting to the point where I'm going to just look at my drawing completely independent from the reference photo and just think, does this feel finished? Are there different elements I want to add? That type of thing. At this point, I feel really good. I untape my outline, and you only untape it once you know that you are not drawing anymore. So I'm going to untape the photograph. And now this is ready to paint. Okay?
Perfect.
So that is the first process that I use in order to create an outline. This is the very first step when I'm creating a project for you. If I'm going off of a photo, I will just trace it utilizing that very exact thing I just showed you. Or if I'm kind of doing something original, I don't start with a drawing, or I'll just sketch it myself. Okay?
All right.
Now, the second part to this is when I actually create outlines for you guys, okay? Because that's part of the educational materials that I provide when I'm teaching. That process is a bit different. So what I do now that I have an iPad is I take my iPad and I open up Procreate. So here's my iPad, open up Procreate. And then if I want to do, let's say I'm creating an outline of this lily pad painting I did in my journal. I first scan it in. You could also take a photo of it. And then what I do is I open it up in Procreate. I add a blank layer on top. I make sure I'm on the drawing button here. And then I just trace it like so. Now, you might be wondering, do I have to have an iPad to do this? Well, yeah, you do. Uh, but I didn't always have an iPad when I first started teaching lessons 8 years ago. I did not have an iPad. So what I would do for that is I would take my finished painting and use a light box to create an outline from that. And the reason why I create an outline from my finished painting is because as I paint, I'm making different decisions than the photograph. Sometimes things ratios get a little bit off kilter as I'm painting, all of that kind of stuff. And then, of course, if it's something that's more original, there was no photograph to start with. So I would need to make an outline after. Does that make sense?
Yep.
But just for like reference of what I'm talking about, here is the reference photo of the lily pad painting here. This is what I looked at when I painted this in my journal. And this is actually very different in terms of the amount of lily pads, all of that kind of stuff. So this is what I'm using to make an outline, or this is what I'm using to make an outline. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay if they're a little bit different. I used to really stress if they were slightly different. And then I just thought, Sarah, calm down. So as I go and I make outlines, you can then go into your later layers, hide the photo, and then now you can see what your outline is looking like.
Oh, nice.
So then you kind of just flip back and forth like, okay, I obviously did not outline the bottom half at all. So you just want to make sure that you're drawing on the correct layer whenever you make an outline. There's nothing more devastating than doing the outline on the photograph,
Mm-hmm.
because then you have to redo the whole thing. I think so. Now, again, I just want to tell you guys this step with the Procreate really only is for educational purposes. And that's because you guys, as students, need something very clear, black and white drawing to transfer. Okay. But my actual method of how I go about to paint my own projects, not in the education sphere or the beginning of the education sphere, is to actually just print off the photo itself and create the outline based off of that. Now, if I wanted to, Like you can, even with this photograph, you can add on to this, right? So let's say I did this lily and I'm like, okay, but I want a background, but there's no background on this photo. Okay, well, let's say we decide to do a horizon line and we do a horizon line here like that. And maybe there's like a little pathway in a field like so. And maybe I decide to add more leaves here. So, like at any point, you can use a photo reference only as a starting off and then adjust, edit, add from there. Okay.
Okay.
But the biggest thing is overall, I look at the shape of something and then I just look at where I'm seeing shadows and highlights. And that's pretty much all I transfer when I make my outline. And from there, I can paint. Okay. And then if I'm trying to recreate outlines for you guys, that's when I will scan my paintings into Procreate and just digitally draw on top of it and trace the image on top digitally. And then now I have a black and white outline for you guys. Okay?
Piece of cake.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good. I hope that's helpful. And just remember that, like, if you're going to do this, especially if you're someone who's like, I love to craft and I want to start doing craft fairs and I want to start selling my artwork, that's so amazing. You just want to make sure that you're utilizing reference free imagery or your own photographs to trace from, because photography is also a copyrighted artwork and original artwork itself. Or you can get the photographer's permission, all of that kind of stuff. There's different avenues, but you just kind of want to be respectful of others' artwork. Unsplash is a great resource for finding copyright free images to use or your own camera.
Excellent.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for sitting here and chatting with me. I hope this was helpful. I hope that you can take this and utilize your own photographs that I know that you have been taking. Just print them out, start making your own outlines. You can prep a few at once if that's easier for you. And then that way, whenever you're ready to paint, you can just sit down and go. Thank you guys for being with me. We'll see you next time. Bye.